Welcome back to another Mark Reviews book review. But first I need to grab the book from my burgeoning book collection over here. Okay. All right, there it is. Look at this. These are some of the books I am most proud about owning and having read. From the earliest days on this channel, you've seen a lot of different book reviews. There are two of these books in here that I have not done a formal review for, and I have finished both of them. So the first one I want to address today, I believe, is this one. Yep. It is Washington, A Life by Ron Chernow. Now, you may or may not have seen my review about Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow. I will leave a link in this card up above, but you can go check that out. Really just a phenomenal read. So I was really excited to get my hands on Washington by Ron Chernow. Same author, same biographer. I need more space on this desk. This book, first of all, look how massive this is. I mean, that is a solid book. And this is the paperback version. But I will leave a link in the description below to where you can pick up a copy of this or where you can find it on Audible. Audible is how I consumed this book, and looking over just the end of this book, the notes, the bibliography, the index and the acknowledgments and things, that represents about that much. So all of this is legitimately presented material about George Washington. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you think you know who George Washington is from what you learned in history, growing up in school, you hear about him cutting down a cherry tree and things like that. Spoiler alert, that did not happen. That was completely fabricated. Anyway, Washington, A Life is going to give you an intimate look at who he actually was as a person. Not just the romanticized version that we have of him. He was an integral part to the founding of this country and the establishment of this world that we now know in the United States. But there's so much more to him as a man that you don't get unless you consume it in a format like this. And again, I recommend the Audible version.
What are you waiting for? Do it!
Because a book like this seems really daunting, but if you break it up into half-hour or hour-long listening sessions, I mean, it's going to last you a while. It took me about a month and a half to get through this on my commute and, while I'm riding my bike and things like that. Let's talk a little bit about the writing style, because if you are familiar with Hamilton, if you have digested Hamilton in any way, same author. So these two books are very similar in the way that they're presented. They're extremely well researched, and everything is presented in a very logical, almost scholarly way. So the approach here is a lot of first-hand accounts, a lot of letters to and from family members and friends and colleagues and things. So Chernow doesn't just throw this all in your face all at once. You have to kind of unpack who Washington was as a person. So Hamilton's a great read. I really enjoyed this one. Washington was great too, but he's not as dynamic of a person. He's not as kind of crazy and hot-headed and things as Hamilton. So the book feels that way as well. Each of these books, in relation to each other, kind of take on the persona of the person that they're describing, and that makes sense. That makes logical sense. So Washington, by nature, was more of a reserved individual. His private life was very private. He didn't enjoy or relish public life much at all, and so a lot of what is presented here is kind of a glimpse behind the scenes, but even in his communications, he comes across as a bit guarded. So you get the more illustrative and insightful peeks into his life from people who are writing to him or about him during that same time frame. Several things that you probably know about Washington. He ended up being the first president of our country, and he was the general of the Continental Army. So he led the Revolutionary War against the British, basically. Washington, to me, has always been more myth than man, right? So more legend than person, because there's this kind of sense of American stoicism and things that takes on a life of its own when we talk about him as an individual. But I want to give you one insight into his life that helps humanize him and helped me connect with him as a person and realize, wow, this is like a normal person with his own struggles and his own problems. Washington did not have a great relationship with his mother. So he kind of came from this weird broken home situation. His home life always was just kind of a mishmash of people who were in need and needed kind of this mutual support. But as time went on, he and his mother were kind of estranged until he got to a point where she felt like she could come ask him for money, and she continued to do that time and time again, and that put a major strain on their relationship. Basically, she was using him for the things that he could offer her. So kind of tough to see him go through that, where he really wanted some kind of maternal or even paternal support in his life and didn't really have much support from his parents. So in many respects, he is very much a self-made man. This goes into how he got his start doing a lot of surveying and kind of landscape management kinds of things, had a career in the military, and quickly made a name for himself for basically having no fear. There are many times in his narrative where you look at the situation and go, how did he survive in that scenario when so many other people did not? How is it possible that this person who is over 6 feet tall and on top of a horse doesn't get hit by a single bullet in a battle where bullets were flying everywhere and cannon shells were going off around him and his horse was shot out from underneath him? Like, there are crazy things that you would picture in the movie version of this book, and they're all true. They all really happened. They're all documented by multiple people who were witnesses to those situations. But that's more of a summary than you needed about George Washington, who he was or what happened in his life. For that, dive into the details of this. But why would you pick up this book if you are looking for a biography about George Washington? Well, longer doesn't always mean better, but this is by far the most comprehensive biography of George Washington out there. To an extent, you can even say that 1776 by David McCullough is, in a sense, a biography of Washington. I mean, it certainly focuses more on him. But I mean, just in the length alone, but certainly in the breadth of what is happening, this is a more holistic approach to the whole revolution, where this dives into the man really from his childhood all the way through the time of his death. Washington accomplished great things, but why should you read this version? I will say, if you are choosing a biographer, if you're new to biographies, Ron Chernow is an undertaking. This would be like a 200 level class in college. This is like Founding Fathers 201, where if you're looking for a Founding Fathers 101, I think I would stick to David McCullough. So he's best known for John Adams, and he has a much more narrative style of writing. So he's using the same firsthand accounts, the letters, the newspaper articles and those kinds of things to paint the same picture, but he will also set the scene. David McCullough would go back and look at weather reports for the days that certain things were happening, and so he would then kind of provide a narrative to what was going on. So there is some artistic license to David McCullough, where he talks about the people he's describing bundling their coats closer around their chins because the wind is blowing in their face, and their horses' nostrils are flaring with the mist of the morning and those kinds of things. But that helps me personally, I'm a very visual person, that helps me be sucked into the story and feel really connected to the person that he's focusing on. So for me, David McCullough is that's a safe introduction to biographies if you really are just trying to get started out. He does a better job of setting the scene, painting the pictures, where Ron Chernow kind of sets some of that aside in the interest of including as much as he possibly can. So this is probably the more faithful version of history, where it's just the facts, ma'am. You know, it's really just the reality of what is being presented. But for me personally, as a biographer, I prefer David McCullough's writing style. This is a phenomenal read. I would recommend it. I listened to it on Audible, so I didn't have the printed copy at the time. This is something that I got afterward, but I do like that the printed copy has a lot of the paintings of the people that are being discussed, and some of the paintings, things that are referenced in the story itself. So if you're someone who likes the tactile version, you want the book version, the link is in the description below. The link to the Audible is also there, so go check that out. I love all of these books about the Revolutionary War era of our nation's history. The Founding Fathers. It really gives you a deeper appreciation and understanding for what they went through and what makes us who we are today. So I definitely recommend not just this book, but any of the books that I have reviewed. They're all part of a long playlist of book reviews that I've done on this channel, so go check those out. Thank you for watching Mark Reviews, and thank you for sticking with me as I experiment a little with stuff here. We just launched a podcast, so go check that out. You'll get to know my wife, who has not really appeared much on this channel until the podcast. And at the end of this video, please consider subscribing if you have not already. That allows me to continue to do this and continue to really live out my dream of incorporating this hobby and also making a little bit of money on the side. That helps me, that helps my family. So thank you for your support, and check out some of the other videos that I've made. Thank you for subscribing.